hardware for the pack. I'm making a removable lid, so I'm using the small webbing with the matching ladder locks. As an alternative, you could still make it removable and just use some tri-glides. For the compression straps, I'll be using the same small webbing and these adjustable side releases. On the prototype pack, I used cord-based compression straps, so on one side I had a line lock 3, and then on the other side I used this side release line lock. For my hip belt, I'll be doing a removable 1-inch belt, and I'll be using these tri-glides and a dual adjustable side release. If you want to be fancy with your removable belt, you could use these ghost hook style adjusters and then a winch style side release in the middle of the belt. Just make sure you get left and right ghost hooks. For the removable hip belt, I first transcribe my belt line to the right side of the fabric. It's 1 inch plus the seam allowance, so 1 3/8 of an inch up from the bottom. With my 1-inch webbing, I have it threaded through my tri-glide, and I'm going to place that so that it's in the middle of that mark. On the back panel, I first transcribe the mark of my belt line to the front of the fabric, and then I attach my hardware. Make sure your belt hardware is right sides out and facing to the inside of the bag. At the top of the bag, I first put in my handle, and then I put in the center lid strap. Now we need to put on the shoulder straps. At the top of this panel, it's got an angle and then a flat spot and then another angle. You want these shoulder straps to be on the angle, parallel with that top edge. So we just align the shoulder straps, and again we're just going to do a stay stitch across the top here. You can baste it or whatever, and that's just to hold it together. Is we're going to take our other 2 lid attachment straps, and we're going to stick them into that same seam just to hold them in place. Now I like these lid attachments to be kind of right over here by the edge of the strap to where it doesn't encroach in this seam allowance that you're going to use later. And I'm just going to tack those right back on top of that strap so that they're on the top of the strap for the lid. With our attachments on at the top and the shoulder straps are now basted in place, we want to connect the wedge to the side of the bag. So make sure your webbing is nice and straight, and then we're going to tack this wedge to the outside of the bag, outside edge of the bag, and just keep it away from the bottom so that it's not in that bottom seam allowance. We're now ready to attach the crown to the back panel. The first thing I like to do is I make relief cuts in the crown down to about these corners, and I don't cross that seam line. I just get them down enough to where I can pull this basically straight. Let me give you a quick tip here of how I do this and make sure that this is aligned. I first start with a straight pin. So I have my standard seam allowance on the outside, but I have my larger flat felled seam allowance along this top edge. I put that pin right through that intersection, and I check to make sure it hits the intersection on the back panel on the underside. Then I do the same thing on the other end, and I get that to line up exactly where it should go. Then I go ahead and clip it. I open this up and then finger press it nice and flat. You see the sides of the crown are perfectly in line. So now to prepare for the flat felling, you want to open this up, and we're going to fold all of this, the back panel and all of the webbing and everything down. I want to keep my crown seam allowance long. I'm going to trim half of this off. And that way the crown long seam allowance will fold around the rest of this. Showing you how much I trimmed off, here's our panel, and I'll flip it over. And these wings are the crown. The rest of this is the back panel plus the shoulder straps. When these are folded under, that creates a finished seam on the inside, and it'll be a very strong layer that we're going to stitch over. On the other side, see it's a nice clean seam along that edge. With my back panel liner, I folded the top down with a double fold, and I'm just going to run a hem right along the top of that. And then positioning the liner to the back panel, you'll just need to do a small pleat here at the back because this is wider so that you can put your foam layer in there. So you'll pleat this side, and then the top will be left free. That's our liner attached with a small pleat just to pull those sides in. So I sized these down from the corner block pattern piece so that they fit within my crown. Because this crown is different height for different people, I oversized the pattern piece. So just set this in here and size it to what you think feels right. The purpose of this is so that your frame sheet will get can slide underneath these and it gets held in place. So when you open the bag, you're not having to deal with the frame sheet as you're trying to get stuff in and out. This will just, it can tuck underneath these and hold it in place. So we have our liner for our frame sheet and the foam pad, and there's some extra volume there. And then the corner blocks are attached to slide that frame sheet underneath. As with all of these, I want to do my alignments. And one thing to remember when you do this is you want to leave some slack in this loop. That's for your ice axe pick. You don't want this real tight and then you're constantly digging into your materials with an ice axe. And then I want to make sure that the bottom panel is square to the bag. So I do that by pulling these apart and making sure that this bottom panel follows pretty well with the bag and that it sits square. Okay, so attaching the bottom to the front lower. If you remember, when we came down the sides, when we were doing this stitch down the side, I stopped short when I came down to the side bottom. And that's so that I can do this 3D corner here. So on every time I come to stitch these edges, I'm not going to stitch off the end. I'm going to stop short of my seam allowance just by a little bit so I can get a nice clean 3D corner here, and then I can go back and do a securing stitch just to reinforce it. Now I'm going to make my turn. So I left this just short of that seam mark. So I'm going to start making my turn here. And here you just kind of have to manipulate the bag to get it to sit exactly where you want it. And it's just important to get those seam marks at that corner to all line up perfectly. And then to get these curves, I cut reliefs so that the fabric would turn on itself as I pulled it together to meet the curve of the side bottom. It just takes a little practice to do these turns, these curves. Takes a little patience. That's really why I recommend doing a prototype, is just to try these things before using your expensive fabrics. Attaching the front panel and the bottom to the back is a critical step here, so I really want to make sure that you're checking your alignments and pinning this out before you go and stitch it. The way I do it is I focus on the critical alignment points. Probably the main one is the bottom center to the back panel center. So you can see here I have my paper pattern. This is the back panel paper pattern. And I make sure that this bottom, the center of the bottom and the center of the back are aligned. Once I have that, and I know that the bag is positioned center of the back panel, then I start tracing the side panel up to the back edge. And that's just a matter of making sure all your seams are nice and taut, your pockets are out of the way. Where the pocket hems across that elastic, I've slid the hemming out of the way so it's just a nice flat edge that I'm going to go over that elastic on. And I follow this all the way up and make sure that it hits the top of the back panel. And so you can see that the side and the top are nice and even. I do the same thing on the other side. Follow it up. And as I'm doing this, I'm keeping this edge as tight as I can get it. And I make sure that the tops align. Well, this is embarrassing. I guess I messed up the recording and I didn't get the money shot here. So what I did was I started in the middle and I sewed all the way over here and then up that side. So once I had that side sewn, I closed this bottom side and then I ran the stitch up this side. I was kind of talking about when I was sewing this that I was really making sure that the stretch material of the pocket, as I was going, I was just finger pressing this down and I was reaching inside the bag to move the stretch material out of the way. That way there would be no puckers. But yeah, so it came out quite nice. The main body, everything fit really well together and aligns really well. So yeah, now I'm going to be moving on to the collar.